All right, guys, good evening. I'm glad that you're here. December 20th, 2023, 5 days, 4 days out from Christmas. Christmas Eve is Sunday. We'll have service Sunday morning, Christmas Eve, and then we'll have a 5 p.m. candlelight service Christmas Eve night, and then Monday will be Christmas. So, if you guys are able to make it to that, please be here. Those online, if you guys can make it, please be here. We won't stream the Christmas Eve service, so be here in person, please, for that on the 24th, Sunday night. So we're going to continue our series, The Bible Has Answers. And the question tonight is, and last week we talked about, was Jesus born on December 24th and kind of how we came about to get there, how we got that. And so I figured this question had been in the box for a little bit, and so I just thought, you know what, we'll just answer this tonight since this is right into the Nativity and Advent story. And so the question is, what do we know about the three wise men that visited Jesus? This is a good question. And I think that if we just look at culture, if we just look at kind of what's gone on in our culture the last 50, 60 years in kind of the commercialization of Christmas, there's a lot of confusion and cultural influences that kind of play into how we understand and we see the wise men that visited Jesus after he was born. And so the other day as I was walking around, I was we were at Walmart or Publix or wherever we were at shopping, and I looked into like the little Christmas cards, and inevitably you'll find a Christmas card typically with three wise men on a card. Like if you're just looking hard, you can find them. Three wise men on a card. Typically there's three of them, and that comes from the three gifts that were given: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then you'll have them dressed in all types of ornate stuff, riding a big camel, and they just have all of this luggage. Sometimes you'll even see them, and they're referred to as the three kings. You've heard that. But there's a hymn, We Three Kings. And so there's a lot of things I think that have kind of played into like how we see and understand these men that came to see if it was true that the Christ child had been born, that the Messiah had actually come. And so I think, like I said, within culture, there's confusion, and there's a lot of things that have kind of gotten played up with the three wise men. If you've ever seen a rendition of a Christmas play, or anybody bought a nativity scene, y'all ever buy the little nativity scenes? The three wise men are always included, and there's elaborate headwear and dress wear, depending on, I guess, what set you get. And also, too, and this is something we'll kind of talk about toward the end, is the wise men in every single nativity scene, in every single movie I've almost ever seen, every single play or show, they are always what? Present at the birth. They're right there at the manger scene, which we will find out that they were not present during the manger scene. So our nativity scene that we have at our house, it sits on the little table, and the three wise men came with it. There was no way to take them out of it because you just pay money and that's what you get. So our three wise men are across the room on the other side of the room because they were not at the nativity, and we cannot have that being out of context in our living room. So anyways, and I had never really thought about that ever, obviously, until later in my Christian walk. I was like, what in the world? They have just really kind of mixed it. So it's almost kind of like culture. They've just kind of thrown everything together. Now, you may say, well, is that really that big of a deal? I mean, is that really that big of a thing? Well, I think that if the Scriptures aren't saying that, then it's a big deal that we not like encourage something that may be kind of taken out of context, or they're in the story, it's just we're kind of adding them in this scene when they're really not in that scene. Now, I get it. For most people, it's probably just an honest mistake. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. Some people just don't know. Or when they read the story, as we'll read in Matthew 2, which this is the account of the wise men, Matthew 2, 1 through 18, we'll just see that there's some subtle things in there that let us know that the wise men were not at the manger scene. And so we'll just kind of unpack that as we go. But what I want to do is I just want to read the story right quick. I just want to read the section, Matthew 2, verses 1 through 18, because this is the only time we have them mentioned in the New Testament. Matthew's gospel, it gives them this account. And so let's read the account, and then from there we'll just kind of unpack kind of what we know about it. Because even the fact that somebody asked, what do we know about the what? How many? 3. The assumption is what? That there was 3, but there's no number given in Scripture. And the reason why we draw that line is because of the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But there could have been more than 3 wise men or 3 magi that came. Could have been more than that. Could have been less than 3. Could have been 2. Somebody could have brought 2 gifts. So, anyways, here we go. Matthew chapter 2. And we will start in verse we'll start in verse 1, and we'll read. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. And after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and he took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious and sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. So, that kind of gives us the story of the wise men, or at least their interaction within the scene after Jesus is born. And so I just want to kind of walk through just kind of briefly some of this in the text, because I think it is important, because I do think it is important that we see this. Let's see. So just as we kind of read this, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Bethlehem was a small village kind of on the southern outskirts of Jerusalem, about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. So it wasn't extremely far necessarily. And this is where the wise men that show up to talk to Herod say that the king will be born. This is where the Messiah will be born. They knew that it was Jesus was to be born in the Bethlehem, the small village of Judea in the days of Herod the king. Now, the Herod that is referenced here, it's important to kind of know who the Herod is. This is Herod the Great, 37 BC to 4 AD. This is the same Herod that started the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, and then that was later finished. And so, behold, we have these wise men, these magi. Now, depending on your translation, does anybody have an NIV in here? Does anybody read from the NIV? If you read from the NIV, they use the word magi. The ESV, the NASB, I think most of those use the word wise men, but the word magi is also used as well. And so they weren't kings. That phrasing in Greek would not have meant that they were kings, although we do get that, I think that was just the assumption by some people, like tradition, oh, they were kings, and so they've come in, which is why you probably see on Christmas cards or pictures them coming in with massively ornate headdresses or whatever the case may be, that these were kings coming to visit the King of Kings. But they weren't kings. And this is kind of interesting. It's almost like when they write the word wise men and magi, it's almost trying to not, I'm trying to think of a way to kind of say this, almost to describe them without necessarily totally describing them. Because we just have that they're wise men. But that doesn't mean a whole lot to us now, because if you're like, well, did these guys just do well on their SAT, or they just did pretty good in college, and they were kind of able just to figure this out, that this star was actually leading to this prophecy in this place. And so you have to almost kind of think about it in terms of these men who came from the east. Probably the best translation like that we can get from like the Greek is that these men were either some type of magician or like astrologers, but like not probably in the sense that we think about crazy, goofy magic now, or astrology like they just kind of look at the stars and looking for signs. It would almost have been that these men almost were like, I guess the phrase would be like, they were into theology, they were into doctrine, they would have had knowledge of like some Old Testament stuff in order to quote, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people of Israel. Anybody know the reference there? What Old Testament prophecy that is? Micah chapter 5. So they would have had to have some reference about Old Testament prophecy for these men to be coming. Like these weren't Israelites, so they're coming far from the east. And so I had one scholar I was reading, he was like, it was like theological scientists. Like these men looked at the stars, they looked at the cosmos, they were waiting for some sign or symbol or something to happen. And because of this star, because of this anomaly in the sky, this kind of supernatural thing, that for whatever reason they are prompted to come because the timing, where it's at in the sky, everything just aligned, that they were in the west and now they're coming this way, and they go, hey, that star, it means something. Like no one just says, oh, there's a really bright star, let me just go follow it. These men, in essence, were anticipating something and looking for something that was to come. And so the most likely place from the east that they come from is Persia. Now, Persia at the time is some 800 to 900 miles away from Jerusalem. Like that's a long trek for them to come to the area of Judea for this star, which by the way had to be some incredible star for them to be like, yes, we need to go. That's pointing to something like greater. And so it says they came to Jerusalem saying, so they show up in Jerusalem as they follow the star saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw, and I want you to notice this, in verse 2 it says, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw what? His star. It's not, and this is a little different from Luke's gospel. It's like, go look at the star, the star. They're saying, where is his star? As if this is extremely specific that who they are looking for is the King of the Jews. Which means this, like they would have had to have some prior understanding and knowledge about there being a Messiah born. Because they quote Micah chapter 5. And when it rose, and we have come to worship him. So they say, we're coming for the King of the Jews. Now, where's the best place to go, right? You're probably going to go to whoever's in charge in Jerusalem and go, hey, listen, we're here to see the King of the Jews. Where's he at? You know, they have no understanding of Herod's demeanor or his aggression or his jealousy that nobody else in the area would be at the level that he is. So obviously when they come to him, they don't realize this dude's a psychopath. Herod had many people killed for even remotely threatening his kingdom in his area, his small little cutout in Jerusalem. He was extremely jealous of that. There are even historians that claim that he would kill family members because he felt threatened that they may want his power or his money. So they come tell Herod, hey, where's the king of the Jews that's been born? We need to go see this guy. Like, we're following his star. And he is obviously like worried by this. And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. Well, he's troubled because what? There shouldn't be any king. I am for all intents and purposes the king here. And all Jerusalem with him. So he's troubled, everybody's troubled, and assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So he gets all of the people that would have understand Old Testament prophecy, the scriptures, he gathers them all together. It's almost as if he's not even sure what's going on. Like, hey, somebody tell me, was this supposed to happen? No one let me know that. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel, which is Micah chapter 5. Micah 5 verse 2, right here in the Old Testament prophecy that we have. So in Micah 5:2, it tells us what? The king will be born, and it tells us where he will be born. So they've come here looking for the king. Herod asked about his chief priests and scribes. Where's this going to go down? They're like, it's going to happen in Bethlehem. Now, obviously, like, they may not even be clear. The scribes may not even be clear or for sure certain that this is actually like the real Messiah that is to be born. Like, they may not even fully grasp that. So then it says, then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. Now, it's important for him to note, like, when they saw the star and when they started the journey. Let me ask you this. When did the star appear? You guys kind of remember that from Luke's gospel? When does the star appear? So when Jesus is born, like, that star appears. Does that make sense? So the star appears, they go to the star, the shepherds go straight to the star. Like, that's what's guiding them. So as soon as they saw the star in Persia, this is 800 to 900 miles away. They're not making the trip the next day. This would have taken months and months. 2 days? 2 months. I challenge anybody without a vehicle to do it in 2 months with the fastest horse. With the fastest horse and the fastest camel. So, 800 to 900 miles, they come to Jerusalem. Herod summons them and says, listen, what time did you see the star? He wants to know when they saw it, so they want to make clear that. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word that I may too come and worship him. Now, Herod does not have good intentions here. He doesn't want to come worship the child. He wants to come kill the child. So, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Now, when people ask as far as the star goes, y'all, I don't know what this star was like, but apparently this thing is moving, guiding, and directing them directly to the place in which the Christ child is. Like, I think about, one of my first kind of thoughts is like when I think about this is Moses and the Israelites in the Exodus. When the Shekinah glory of God moves and they're just able to kind of follow that. So in essence, this is some supernatural event for them to be 800 or 900 miles away. That's the star. They show up in Jerusalem, and then the star kind of leads and guides them to that specific spot. I just find that like remarkable. So obviously there's some supernatural thing that's happening here is in regards to the star. Now, so when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So the star, it's almost like, and it says before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. So it's like it's leading them straight to it. Very neat. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped. And then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. And then we have, obviously, the flight to Egypt. They're warned in a dream after they get there. Look, don't go back the way you came to Jerusalem. Like, don't go back and don't tell him. Go another way around so that you don't have to tell him. And now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and he took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. And this was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. So we'll talk about some of the factors within the wise men. But there again, I think the focus is not so much on their identity. Does that make sense? Not so much on their identity. We discussed this last week. If the Bible wanted us to know the exact day that Christ was born, they would have simply told us the day, right? Like part of that is just God has given us in His Word what He has for us. And so there's nothing wrong with asking a question or saying, hey, what about this? There's nothing wrong with kind of doing that. And there are some people that are just, man, they just love to ask questions that like there's just kind of maybe no answer to because they're just inquisitive. There's nothing wrong with that. But like the Bible just kind of lays this out for us and says, here's what they did, here's who they were, and they let us know exactly kind of like this is kind of who they were. But I do think that it's not wrong for us to try to gain some context around this. So the wise men or the magi, either word that is used is fine. But these men are of some importance and some value, most likely in Persia where they came from. That's the most, the use of magi, astrologers, magicians, scientific theologians, those guys in Persia, that's probably where they came from. So, like I said, 800 to 900 miles away through desert. Like this was not an easy trek or an easy journey for them to make if you were to kind of like draw a straight line from Persia to Jerusalem. So the trip would have taken them a while. We talked about the fact that they saw his star. That was the label that they gave it. They didn't say that we just saw a star. It was like we saw his star. Like they were as sure. And it doesn't tell us, hey, the Lord revealed to us in a dream or spoke to us through an angel that the Christ child was here. They just kind of show up and go, where's he been born at? Like they just know that. It doesn't give us any information about whether they had some kind of divine intervention and they were told that. They show up and they are, I mean, you travel 900 miles with all these gifts, you're pretty confident that what you're coming to see is there. Like that's absolutely, like they were positive of that. And then when you ask the question, well, how did they know? Like is there any connection throughout Scripture that would lend us anything for these Persian astrologers that how would they have any knowledge in Persia 900 miles away that there would be a Messiah born to the Jews? Like where does that kind of come from? Now, probably the only place that we can kind of turn would be to the book of Daniel. So if you guys will flip for me, if you will, we'll go to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. Now, some of you will maybe be familiar with this particular story. There are some other texts in Daniel that would lead to us, but I just want to kind of focus in on Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. So in Daniel 5, 1 through 12, we have King Belshazzar. He's made a great feast for thousands of his lords, and he's drinking wine in front of the thousands. And then we have this kind of crazy intervention here. And I want to read this. I want to read this for you because this was in Babylon in Daniel's day. So the Israelites have been taken captive. Daniel is there. He has an ability to explain dreams and riddles and just crazy anomalies that happen. Daniel's able to explain that. And so Daniel's going to be called in by the king to kind of deal with the issue that has just happened. But I want you just to hear this. Daniel 5, verses 1 through 12 says this: King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. And Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of the silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. And when they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them, they drank wine, and they praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. So you're setting the scene with King Belshazzar. They've raided the temple of God in Jerusalem. They've taken all of these things. They've passed it all out to all of the concubines. Everybody's drinking. They're merry. And immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. That's what happens when you see a hand writing on plaster. And the king called loudly to bring the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. He wants to know what has been written. He wants to know what has been said. What does this mean? Is this some kind of divine warning or divine purpose? And notice who he calls in: the Chaldeans, the enchanters, and the astrologers, which is where we kind of get this root word for wise men and magi. So like, if they're from Persia, which that's the most logical place that they would be from traveling and have that same name, there's a good chance that because of all the things that Daniel told the men in Babylon and Persia, that this is not a far-fetched to believe that these men, because of the prophecies of Daniel and because what he told them in Babylon, that they would have had some understanding that there would be a Messiah that would come. That there would be somebody that would come ultimately to redeem Israel. So, verse 8, then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. The queen, verse 10, the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you, or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him, and King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. So, in other words, Daniel in his divine wisdom and his understanding as prophet spoke to those men. Like he talked to these men who were ultimately from Persia. Because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show you the interpretation. So Daniel comes in, is able to explain it to the king. And so you can read the rest of the story in Daniel chapter 5. But there's also several other places where we find Daniel as he speaks and enlightens these astrologers, these enchanters, these wise men who were looking for stuff, right? He's able to explain this stuff to him. So I don't think it's a super hard fetch to say that throughout history, from Daniel's time up until the birth of Jesus, it wouldn't be hard to where even in Babylon and Persia, that this stuff was being talked about. That the same Jews that they took captive, the same Israelites, that one day what? There was going to be a king that was going to come and redeem them. So if this was passed down, because obviously Daniel's telling them everything they need to know, he's not even from there. And they're like, man, this guy just knows stuff. Our king has a vision or a crazy dream. Daniel comes in, he's able to explain it fully. Like that would have been noted within their history And it would not have been a far stretch to say that these guys from Persia were like, man, like we've been told these things were going to happen. So there was always wise men. There was always these wise men from the east that were looking for what? This sign, this symbol. So for all of those years, these wise men, they're still seeking. They're still looking for this sign. And when the sign comes and the star appears, they go, yes, that's where we'll go. So, like I said, I don't think that's a far jump. The Scripture does not necessarily explain that to us, but just as we kind of trace back and go, well, where were people in Persia intersecting and involved with the Israelites? Well, in Daniel, and other places as well, but Daniel specifically, as he talks to these men, as he talks to them, as he says, he enlightened your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief, and then he's chief, so he's over all the magicians, all the enchanters, all the Chaldeans, and astrologers. And you better believe Daniel was what? You better believe Daniel was talking about the future events that were to happen and that were to take place. And so these men, they're sitting there going, hey, we believe this is it. So that's really cool to me that you have men that are coming from Persia who are not Israelites, who are not part of the covenant people of God, but they recognize the sign of the king and they came. So, like I said, I found that very cool. Most commentaries that you read will make a connection between Daniel 5 and a couple other places in Daniel kind of directing this to like these Persian men who came from the east, the Magi, or the wise men. There again, let me ask you this. Does it really matter if there's even a reference point to them in Daniel? It doesn't really matter because for whatever reason they came, and the Bible is very clear that they came seeking the king, and not only did they come to seek the king, but they found the king. And once they found the king, they worshiped the king. So if you just kind of look at the story of the Magi, you maybe could put it in terms of identity, inquiry, and then discovery. So their identity, not necessarily that important. Their inquiry, hey, where is this king at, as they come to Jerusalem and talk to Herod. And then their discovery, ultimately, is that the star led them to Bethlehem and they're able to see the child, which at that point they knew this is the king. And then they went a route the other way, and then Mary and Joseph take the child and they flee to Egypt because Herod's going to come in and he's going to kill every single boy under the age of what? 2. So, the number of the wise men. So we discussed that. The number of the wise men was how many? We don't know. Kate informed me in the car. I guess Courtney was talking to them about it. And she was like, how many wise men were there, Dad? She asked me that question the other day. I said, well, traditionally there's 3. And she goes, it's not true. We don't know. There could have been 3. There could have been less. There could have been more. I was like, you're right. She goes, the Bible doesn't say. And I was like, you're right, it doesn't say. So she kind of hammered me about that. And then she asked me, she says, well, Dad, do you know the wise men's names? And I was like, I don't know. Now, I did put up here the names of the wise men. In the question, there were several other little bullet points about it, so I just thought I'd answer them. So, number of the wise men, we don't know. There was obviously men, there's plural, so there's at least 2, but could be more than 3. And they brought the gifts. So, we don't know. If it wasn't 1, it was multiple. And I was also thinking, too, if you travel 900 miles, you probably didn't dress in such elaborate stuff. That probably would have slowed your journey down or weighed you down, especially if you're going through the desert. So they probably dressed more comfortably than what we see in the pictures and drawings and stuff like that. But what do I know? I've never been on a camel, and I've never traveled across the desert. So number of wise men is as little as 2, but as many as, I don't know. Kate was like, there could have been 1,000 wise men. I was like, I don't know if there was 1,000. But there was probably a handful, at least 3. History, kind of tradition in like Jewish history says the number was 3. But there again, the scriptures don't tell us, so it's really irrelevant. The names of the wise men. So I just kind of looked this up and was just curious. There is Jewish tradition that gives names for each of the wise men. There is tradition there. Caspar, C-A-S-P-A-R, Caspar, Melchiri, and Balthazar. So those are the 3 names that are just kind of given to these guys historically. And there's even some like Jewish, like I guess, teaching that like they teach these names or these names. Now, it's not in the scriptures, so we don't know. So maybe that was their names. Maybe it was like George, Bob, and Harold. I don't know. Probably not those names. But we don't know if these were the actual names of the wise men. There again, it doesn't really matter because it could have been more than three. We're not sure. Could have just been two. And then kind of a question that I think this obviously like kind of like irks me a little bit is like when you have the wise men that are placed at the birth of Christ. So the wise men did not, I emphasize, did not visit Jesus at his birth. And there's a few places that would just kind of lend us to say that. Now, if you just kind of read through this story real quick and didn't really think about it, you may just kind of brush through it and go, oh yeah, like, well, they were there at the birth, right? But there's a few kind of context clues that would tell us otherwise. One is that in Luke 2:16, the shepherds, when they show up, it says that they found the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a what? Manger, right? So manger. And they used the term babe, which would have been like a brand new born child. Not child. Infant, little, itty bitty. In Matthew 2:11, we see 2 points. It says, and we'll start in verse 10, Matthew 2:10, and when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, and going into the what? House. Going into the house. So we've moved from manger, stable, animals' hay, into the house, and they saw the child, which is different in Greek than the babe or the infant. Meaning that like when they saw him, they were like, this is a child. Like they were looking at him thinking in terms of like not like wrapped in swaddling clothes. But this child was the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped him. Then they opened their gifts. And so you have Luke 2:11, they saw the child with his mother. And then Luke 2:11 also, they go into the house. So 2 completely different settings here. Another kind of clue for us too is that when they are told to leave by the dream, right, and go another route, don't go back to Jerusalem, don't go talk to Herod for sure, go back to your home another way. Go back to your home another way. They told him not to go back. Rise, take the child and his mother, flee. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now, after the flight to Egypt, we understand the flight to Egypt was because Herod was going to kill all the children, all the boys. Now, this is what he says, Matthew 2:16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Meaning this, that Jesus was under 2 years old because he obviously was doing a timeline. He was under 2 years old, but obviously not at all an infant. So Jesus could have been 1.5 at the time that the wise men showed up to actually see him with his mother and worship him. Which is why Herod was like, man, we just go, okay, every child, under all the males under 2, we'll just go kill them all. That way that will for sure cover, if I missed it by any couple of months, that would cover the death of this king who has showed up. So, anyways, those are just some interesting things to kind of like point out to, that the wise men, the number doesn't have to be 3 necessarily, but the Bible doesn't tell us, that the names of the wise men aren't mentioned, that we don't have a ton of information about their identity and origin, other than most scholars believe that kind of from a historical perspective that they came from Persia. There's the allusion in the drawing from Daniel chapter 5 that Daniel spoke to these same guys from their lineage, like as they grow up, like as astrologers and people came in, the story of what Daniel said would have been told. There would have been some understanding of the Old Testament, at least prophesying a coming Messiah for the Jews. And so all of that kind of lines up. It all lines up, but at the same time, even if that's not a connection, the important thing is that God had aligned these men from the east to come and to see the king. So they saw the king, they worshiped the king. So their identity, not necessarily that important. Their inquiry, not even so much that important, but their discovery of the Christ child, that's exactly what we wanted. Because ultimately, y'all, like, we are all those wise men seeking, searching for the king. And if we search and we knock and we ask, we will find him. And anyone who would call on the name of the Lord, anybody that would run to Christ, he will not turn away, and he will gladly welcome in. Just like I said, just kind of almost a beautiful gospel picture within the story. And obviously all of that leads to the flight to Egypt, which ultimately fulfills the prophecy as well. And I just, like, the Lord just works that out in just a beautiful, awesome, crazy way. So as we have questions when we read, ask questions, desire things, be nosy, if you will, within the text, ask things, dissect things. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes the Bible just gives us what the Bible gives us, and we should just go, what? I just accept that on faith. It is true, and it is sufficient. And so we can keep on rolling with the story. Their names are irrelevant. The number of them is really irrelevant. The point is that all worked out in God's plan to ultimately bring about their flight to Egypt to fulfill the Scripture, and then ultimately Christ's perfect life, his death, burial, and resurrection. So anyways, this is good stuff, good questions. Like I said, I like those things. People ask questions and are curious. So anyways, guys, thank you for tonight. Awesome guys online. If you listen, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you Sunday at 10 a.m. Don't forget this Sunday, 10 a.m. and then 5 p.m. Sunday night, candlelight Christmas Eve service, and then Christmas is on Monday. So obviously, and we won't have Bible study next Wednesday. There'll be no Bible study next Wednesday. We won't have that till after the New Year. Is that right? Will that be the first Wednesday? The following one will be? So then we'll have fellowship supper the following Wednesday. We don't know what the theme is, but we'll have it in the bulletin Sunday. So thank you guys for hanging out and listening.